Hi. I've been prompted to come out here as the end of the baby boomers to talk about uh, marriage number one, right? When we were dating, it was kind of romantic, right? He was a musician, aspiring to be a recording artist, um, very handsome guy, very handsome. Um, I thought he was a spiritual man. He said he was a Nazarene. I didn't know what that meant. I asked him what that meant. He said, he was spiritual, right? And I'm like, cool, right? But when somebody says that they're spiritual, you have to understand that there are many different kinds of spiritual. There's different degrees of spirituality. Just like if you say you're a Mason, there are different degrees of Masonry, right? If you say that, you're a college educator, there's different degrees of educators, okay? So just keep it in context, okay? So anyway, what I had wanted to do was talk about my first marriage, because marriage seems to be a topic, and I'm going to tell you, my first marriage, as soon as we got married, it was like I became a non-person. All of a sudden, I became my husband's, personal property. Not only was I his personal property, but everything that I own and my being, he felt belonged to him. I couldn't even understand that kind of mentality, because my father, definitely, he treated me like a human being. So I've never encountered a situation where a man was, so chauvinistic that, they couldn't even treat you like a human being. Because that was the word that we used back then. We didn't use misogynistic. We used chauvinist, right? There was no way in the world that we believed that men hated us. We just thought they thought they was better than us and that we were beneath them. That's why we thought, okay, you're a chauvinist. Okay? So, I had that conversation with him. He wasn't educated. No, he was not. So, needless to say, I came across something that I wasn't, prepared to come across, which was an uneducated, chauvinistic, liberal arts husband, right? I wanted to be in the liberal arts myself when I was younger, until I realized that there was so much corruption in that industry that I was like, oh no, and if you're not involved with the hierarchy within of that corruption, that you would end up being exploited, in a worse way, especially as a woman, right? I used to pay very close attention to, like, the movie Mommy Dearest, right? Mommy Dearest was a career actress She bore no children of her own, but she was very much disrespected, even though she was very successful. She was triangulated by her husband, against, having a decent relationship with her adopted children. And I was watching that and I was like, oh, that's just so unfair. That's so unfair. And, and I was like, okay, so basically the movie had, gave me signals that, there was a lot of, situations that were unfair, and one of my thoughts was, okay, one of my primary thoughts was, okay, do I have, two pathways? Do I pick a pathway of having a career, or do I have a pathway of being, a housewife? Right? Well, at the time, I was like, no, I'd rather have the career. Right? Because, the thing that I was seeing amongst the men was, the only thing they seemed to really value, and that's not much of a value, but the only thing they seemed to value among women was their aesthetics. They didn't feel like women, had intelligence, feelings, common sense, because it just seemed like all of the women were treated like children. They were treated worse than children, actually, because they were grown. They were treated like children by men who in my eyesight looked very barbaric. It's like, how are you thinking that you're really a father figure and you're so barbaric? Okay? So anyway, getting back to my first marriage, right? So I get married to my first husband. He said, he didn't want to do anything wrong, he wanted to marry me, for the sake of my reputation. And I was like, oh, that's sweet, you want to marry me and make sure that I have a good reputation. At the time, I did think that was sweet. It sounded sweet, okay? But, like I said, once I got married, all of a sudden, he started, telling me who I could talk to, who I couldn't talk to, right? My single friends, were off limits. He called them hoes. And I was like, well, why are they hoes? Well, he seen them at the club. I like, oh, you seen him at the club? And he was a musician. So, he worked in clubs. And that's what I didn't understand. I'm like, you work in clubs. How would you demonize the club scene? And this is where, you plan to make, your profession. And he was like, oh, because he's a man, he can handle this. And because I'm a woman, I can't. I'm like, and I asked him, I said, so are you saying that, there aren't any women in the club? He's like, sure, there's women in the club, And I was like, well, are there, women that own clubs? He's like, sure, there are a few women that own clubs. And, so I'm trying to understand, what it is, right? So this was what he had told that he didn't want me in the club. I'm like, but you're in the club all the time. If you're not working in the club, then you're in the club, uh, you know, checking the pulse of the club, and so that you know how to, stay in tune with the club scene, and be able to do music, and and create new music that that you think that people in the club would like. Why don't you want me in the club? He's like, well, because you're my wife. And I was like, that doesn't make sense to me. So anyway, he didn't see this as anything that needed to be negotiated. He thought that his word of he doesn't want me in the club was final. And I was like, if you're going to be in the club, I don't see anything wrong with me being in the club. So, and I used to love to dance, and I used to like watching people dance in the club. They hadn't really started doing a lot of the the sexual dances. This was right before they were doing the butt, right? That's when I was, then I was like, the butt, because up until that point, we were still doing things like hip hop, more or less, expression dancing. And the expression was, hip hop. All you had to do is look up what hip hop is, right? And then you had other people that were doing like the robot, or disco dancing, and I'm like, well, yeah, you can't tell me where I can go and where I cannot go. I'm a grown woman, And he's like, no, but you're my wife, And I'm like, say that one more time and I will tear this certificate up. You mean to tell me that this piece of paper now makes me lose my rights? And he said, yeah, that's why you got my last name. And I was like, you said it. You just said the last thing that I ever want to hear, right? And I took the marriage certificate and I shredded it. I just tore it up in little bitty pieces in front of him. I said, now you can treat me better. Now you can go back to treating me in that loving, caring way that you used to treat me. But no, instead he went on an irate tantrum that I tore up the certificate. And I told him, I said, you know what? I bought that certificate. I paid for the marriage certificate. You didn't have any money. Matter of fact, you're living in my apartment. Thank God. Thank God it wasn't a community property state. Or else, he probably would have tried to take over my apartment. But, we had a lot of battles, over, him trying to dominate me. And I'm like, look, you really don't have the strength to dominate me. He was like, oh, I'll kick your ass. I'll beat your ass. I said, no, you won't. Because I didn't believe that he would. Right? So the first time, we got into a physical violence, I was crushed. I was like, I thought you loved me. How dare you, you hurt me. And he was like, well, just think of it as if, your father giving you punishment. I was like, no, I won't. And I said, you better not do it again. He was like, okay, well, I ain't going to do it again. But, you need to be a more, a more submissive wife. And I'm like, what is this? What do you mean submissive? Right? You can't even lead your own life. How the fuck are you expecting me to lead my life? You know? And it was like, well, just because, I ain't making no money, I'm gonna be rich one day. And I said, well, I'll wait for that day to actually submit. How about that? So then, my girlfriend, she was, telling me that she was going to the club, and I should meet her there. And I was like, okay, I'll meet you there. So I go to the club. I'm at the club with her, and and she has her friends there, her other friends, and we're at the club. And a few hours later, my ex-husband comes walking in. At the time, he was my husband. And he was like, come on, let's go. I said, no, I'm here visiting with my friends, and he was like, I'm not having my wife in this club. And I was like, I'm not leaving. So he pulled me out of my seat. We struggle. I fall down against the wall onto the floor. Then he grabs me by my foot and drags me out of the club. First of all, the club should have never let that happen. But he tells the owner of the club that I am his wife. And he didn't want his wife in the club. So this made people stand back, stand down, okay? So I will never forget that. That was the most humiliating time of my life, was to be dragged out of the club by my foot, my leg, on the floor, right? But I don't take those things personally. That was, to me, a reflection of his behavior, not mine. I would never do that to another human being. Okay? How and why he felt like he had the right to do that to another human being based off of, I don't know. I still don't even understand it. He says the marriage certificate gave him the right to do so. Okay? And I told him, I said, well, I tore up the marriage certificate. You should not be doing that. Our agreement has, been renegotiated according to me. Right? Because, a lot of times, there was always conversations back then, a piece of paper isn't going to make or break, a relationship. Okay? So, needless to say, one of the main reasons, like I said, he was a very good-looking man, and, very passionate and stuff, I ended up getting pregnant, and, when I was pregnant, I thought, that this would maybe he would step up, to being, like a real husband. Right? What's a real husband? It seems like men can't even tell you what a real husband is, because what they're doing as a single person, they still continue doing the same thing that they were doing when they were single, even when they were married. So I'm like, okay, whatever, right? So after I got pregnant, we would have our arguments, and he would leave and disappear. Who knows where he was at? I didn't really care. because I'm pregnant. All I want to do is, just make this happen. You know, I guess, you know, make it work, because when I asked him for a divorce, what he says is he doesn't believe in divorce and he's not going to give me a divorce. And I'm like, oh, okay. I don't know what that's all about, because, he spent more time away from me than he spent, being with me. And so and of course, he always had this plan, I would be a real husband if, I had the finances, but I'm dedicating my life to being a recording artist and a musician, and I'm an artist. Right? And I'm like, okay, I'm not with that. You need to work, so a few times, I went with him on doing like lawn work with him. Interesting enough, he never took me with him, to any rehearsals, never took me with him to any of his performances. So I wasn't really a part of that scene at all, except, when I go out with my girls, right? And we would go to the club. And a lot of the girls, they were still single, and they just needed somebody to go with them, so that they wouldn't be going to the club by themselves. Okay? Because they knew I was married. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, if they catch them a husband, then, we would be, two married people, right? But, of course, they didn't. And, so one of the things that he had did was he had taken my money. He had taken like $6,000 of my money. And to be honest, this money I had found at the job, and I brought it home. And I told him I brought it home, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. And he was very eager to count the money. He didn't believe I had the money. Well, let me count the money with you, I don't know how much it was, I said, but I found this money. So he's counting up the money, and so I go to work, and when I come back home from work, I was working for the city at the time, and when I get back home, the money's gone. He's gone. And then he shows up with all of this recording studio equipment. And I'm like, hey, I can't find my $6,000. What happened to it? He said he took it. I said, well, why did you take it? He said, well, your money is my money. And I'm like, no, that's not true. You don't just take somebody's money. So he was like, well, he did. So he already purchased, equipment. And this was going to be his big break, where he would become this multi-millionaire recording artist. Right? But I'm feeling violated. I'm feeling like my own husband is stealing from me. Not only is my husband beating on me, disrespecting me in public, but now he's gone too far and has stolen my money. Right? So he leaves, I guess, to go to, talk with some of his band members and stuff. And I'm so angry. I bust up all of the recording equipment that he bought with my money. Okay, he's shocked and appalled when he comes in. Why did you do that? Why? This was our big break, and I'm like, it's not our big break because you stole the money from me, and so he acts like he's devastated. And I'm like, I don't have time to talk about it because I got to go to work. So I go to work, and when I come home from work, this man destroyed everything in the apartment. He didn't leave nothing undamaged. Even the mattress was shredded. The silverware was bent. Everything. I'm telling you, he did not leave anything undamaged. It was every single thing. I couldn't salvage not one thing except the clothes that I was wearing. Even the cat that I own, right, was no longer in the apartment. I was just completely devastated. Right? And so he disappeared. I don't know. I can't even remember how long he had disappeared. But at that point, I was like, I'm done. I don't care how much it costs. I'm getting a divorce from this man. This guy is absolutely insane. For sure, we're going to end up killing each other. Or he's going to end up killing me, or I'm going to end up killing him in self-defense. Period. So I go to the job. I tell the job, look, I found out that I'm pregnant, and I want to confess that, I have found some money here at the job, and I just want everything to be okay, with my child. I don't want my child having any kind of bad karma, because they asked me, like, why are you confessing? You completely got away with the money. I said, because I'm pregnant, and I don't want, any bad karma, to descend onto my offspring. And they looked at me all weird and funny, I was like, okay, but we're going to have to press charges against you. I'm like, okay, no problem. So I go to court, and they tell me, okay, you're going to be convicted because you confessed. And, you're going to be on probation until you pay, restitution, court charges, and punitive fees. I was like, okay, no problem. Right? So I tell him, what happened. And he was like, oh, you're a fool. I married a fool. And I'm like, yeah, you did. Are you going to sign the divorce papers? He was like, no, I don't get divorces, I told you. And I was like, okay, well, I really don't see this going anywhere because, we obviously don't see eye to eye. He was like, well, you pregnant with my baby. What do you mean? You know, and I was like, yeah, but, it doesn't always work out, right? And so he was like, so what are you going to do? Now you got a felony and and I told him, I said, yeah, but it's deferred. It's deferred because I confessed, and I'm on probation. So I can't do nothing wrong. I can't be in no bad element. You in this getting high shit, you can't even be around me. So you should just sign the divorce papers. And by the way, since we're going to lose the apartment, I'm going to go down to California and live with my dad. So he storms out. And somehow or another, he knew the day that, I was going to leave. Somehow he knew the day that I was going to leave. I stayed long enough to have the baby. Was there about a year before I actually went down to California. And somehow or another, like I said, he shows up, boom, you getting ready to leave, let me go with you, right? I'm like, why do you want to come with me? Well, I want us to be a family, and besides, I'll have a better chance at becoming, a recording artist down in California. I'm like, well, let's go, I'm going. So, I had bought a car, I had bought a trailer. He built he built an encasement on the trailer with plywood and packed up the few things that I had. And so we moved down to California to go stay with my dad. Right? So, while we were living at my dad's house, we got into another argument. And most of the time, I know you're like probably wondering, what kind of arguments did you guys get into? The kind of arguments we got into was him trying to tell me how I should be. Him trying to tell me how I should act. Him trying to tell me what I need to do. Him trying to tell me this and tell me that. And I'm like, you don't know me. You don't even know my capabilities. You can't tell me shit. Okay? Why did you even come down here with me? I thought that you were going to be cooperative, that you wanted to be a family, I could see it was all a lie. So what this guy does is he ends up, popping me with his fist in my eye while he's in my dad's house. Right? And I guess my dad must have heard us arguing and whatever, and I was trying my best, to stay in my room. And my dad, he called me out. He was like, Cherie, come here. And I go out there, but I put sunglasses on. He was like, well, what's going on between you guys? I said, Dad, I don't know. He was like, says, you guys are not going to be fighting in my house. I said, yeah, I understand that, Dad. It wasn't a fight. So then my dad says, man, you got to go. So then, my husband at the time, he was telling me, well, Cherie, get your shit and let's go. And I'm looking at him like, go where? He didn't have no money. He didn't have nothing. no car. The car was mine. You know, he wanted me and my daughter. I don't know. I guess he thought I was going to go with him and live in the car or something, or I don't know what he thought. But whatever it was kind of insane, right? And then my father speaks up and he says, Cherie, you know, don't you go with him. If you go with him, then don't come back. And I was like, oh, well, bye, you know. Right? And that was the last time that I seen my ex-husband. You know, to me, it was a very horrible situation, right? And of course, you know, even though that happened, you know, I thought, you know, maybe it was just me. Maybe I'm just too strong-minded. You know, maybe he was right. You know, he needs him a more submissive woman. Yeah, whatever, right? More supportive woman, whatever. Right? And one of the things that he had said that, you know, when he had called me, you know, this is your last chance, you know, you'll never see me again and I ain't going to have nothing to do with you or the child. And I was like, okay, you know, and that was the last I ever seen of him. And he never looked back. He didn't try to be, you know, have a relationship with his daughter. And that's just how it went, you know, until the day that I was able to afford to have a publicized divorce. But, you know, with a child, you know, I couldn't afford to spend, you know, that kind of money when I'm just struggling, you know, to keep a roof over, you know, me and my child's head, keep her in Pampers, giving her Similac, getting her through daycare, and you know, all the expenses, you know, that go along with having a child, right? Because she was growing fast. I'm telling you, it was like every 3 months it was a new size of clothes, a new size of shoes, you know, a different type of, you know, supplies needed at the daycare. And, you know, there was just no way I was going to be able to save enough money, you know, to turn around and just pay for a divorce. Eventually, you know, I got the divorce. Eventually. But that occurred when I actually decided to marry my second husband. Right? When I finally decided to marry my second husband. My second husband, you know I told him my circumstances, right? That I was still married, right? But, you know, haven't been able to afford a divorce because he wouldn't sign the divorce papers. You know, and back then divorces, you know, were expensive, right? And they intentionally made it expensive to discourage people into having divorces. Right? A publicized divorce, you know, I think you had to advertise like in the surrounding county newspapers, and you had to pay the filing charges. You had to hire a detective because children were involved. You know, that's how, you know, the stipulations were when it came to getting a divorce, you know, with children. It was very, very involved and expensive. And as a woman, you know, a young woman at that, I was young, you know. So needless to say, it was my fiance at the time that ended up helping me pay for a divorce. But this was many years later. right? He ended up helping me get an advertised divorce. I think it cost us like $600, and he paid for that, right? But the reason why he paid for it is because, you know, during the time that we were dating in California, he had got a promotion to be a district manager in Texas, right? And I told him, I said, good luck. Have a nice life. And he was like, oh, no, 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 no. I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to even accept that job, unless you come with me. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to come with you unless, you have a promise, to marry me, or, give me some kind of security. At least here in California, I may not be doing great, but I have family here, And he was like, don't worry about it, If we move to Texas and it doesn't work out, because you have to, give up all your furniture, your apartment, and get away from your family, I'll give you everything. He said he'll leave. He said he will leave and just leave me with the furniture and everything if it doesn't work out. And I was like, okay, that sounds great. But I also want to be able to transfer with my job. I was working at Alamo at the time. I was, the administrative supervisor. And I said, well, if I get a transfer, then, then it was just meant. It was meant to happen, right? And sure enough, the week that he was getting ready to actually leave, my transfer comes in. So we didn't have time to get rid of anything except, basically to throw everything out, and donate my vehicle. And I ended up driving the U-Haul truck with some of the stuff, and he was driving the company car. So we get to Texas, and I crash, right? I crash out, right? Because if I get to Texas, the way that they were treating women here was demeaning to me, right? And as a minority woman, it's even worse, right? I had to take a $500 pay cut per month, and they put me on nights and weekends. And I'm like, I'll never be able to have, I'm like, I can't see my kid. I can't see my partner, This is horrible. I got a pay cut. I still have fines that I have to pay. I made this move quick in a hurry. I hadn't even told the courts that I left the state, It was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. But, I got through it. Okay? I got through it. And my fiance at the time, he didn't like the way that I was breaking down. And he retaliated with, well, if you're not happy here, then you need to just go back home. And I'm like, go back home where? I don't have a home. And he was like, that's not his problem. So, I buckled down and I said, well, I'm going to make this work. I'm going to make this work. I'm put my big girl panties on and just try to make it work. Right? So, I was crushed because, the one thing that he had did was, he reneged on what he had said. If it doesn't work out, then, I will go ahead, and he would just leave, and, I would, he would leave me with a home. right? Because I've I don't operate if I don't have a home. I just, I would be lost without a home. Home has always been a priority to me. It just always has been. Um, you know, and because, I could say home has been a priority for me is because there was a time that I was homeless. And during that time that I was homeless, because I had owned a truck and a camper, I was able to camp out at, parks and RV places and manage, fishing and, just pretending like, I was a camper, on vacation. you know, but, when that had happened, I had kind of vowed to myself, I would never be homeless. So I guess that's why, home has been a very serious priority in my book. Before even having a vehicle, make sure that, you have a place to live. Living in a vehicle or is out of the question. There's just a lot of restrictions that come with that. And I knew that when I was living in my camper truck. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of in awe in the people, who are suffering with homelessness right now, and they're living in their vans or their cars or their, or RVs, and I can feel them. I can feel them because I've went through that, and it you make do, you try to find, campgrounds, that have showers and, washing facilities, and when you can't, you at least try to make sure they have a restroom, that you can use. So yeah, so anyway, I get pregnant, and my fiance at the time, he was like, oh my gosh, I can't have you, married to your husband and having his child, so he helps me get the divorce and then marries me. And by the time we get ready to have the child, we've already gotten married in Vegas, and we're embarking on buying a home. I was working at the time. I was an assistant manager for, a huge apartment management company. And so we were able to get a nice home. And, but, my credit was bad, and in order to get the best possible rate, they advised, well, you guys are married, you don't need to be on the mortgage, right? And Texas is a community property state, so it doesn't matter, right? And I was like, okay, no problem, because I'm not going anywhere anyway, because I'm having his child, it is going to be what it is, right? So, we end up getting a house built about the same time that I'm almost having the baby. So right before I have the baby, like a month or two before I have the baby, we're moving into our home, right? And I'm saying our home, okay? Because I'm like, wow, this all ended up working out. It ended up working itself out, right? I didn't know that my husband would turn around and start judging me. I thought that, he was on board with everything that was going on. He was very understanding. He understand how the whole breakdown happened in my first marriage, and yay, and yeah. You know. But obviously, I guess he changed his mind. At some point, I don't know when it was, but I knew when it happened. Because initially, this was a man that was very caring, very nurturing, totally participated in cleaning the house, doing laundry, feeding the baby, changing diapers, dropping her off or picking her up at daycare. He was totally on board for all of that. I'm thinking this is great, but how I knew it had changed is one day he had came. I kind of know, right? What had happened was his son from his previous marriage had came down to stay with us. He had became problematic for his first wife, and so she was like, you take your son. So I'm like, good, I never had a son, this would be great, and he was really struggling in school. They had wrote him off as being a dummy, and I was like, no, he is not dumb. I can help him learn. I can help him, learn how to manage bite-sized information that he could actually digest. And I did that. I helped him, go from being a failing student to being, an AB student. I did. I didn't have to worry about any of that with my daughter, my first daughter, because my first daughter was an AB student automatically. She just absorbed information very well. But right after his son showed up, he said, he started saying things like, I don't appreciate him. And I'm like, what do you mean I don't appreciate you? I appreciate everything. I think you're remarkable. I think you're an outstanding man. What are you talking about? And he was like, well, I don't appreciate, he kept saying, I don't appreciate him. And I didn't understand what he meant by it, And then he said, the only thing that I'm going to do around the house is take out the garbage and do the lawn. And I'm like, yeah, but I have a baby. What do you mean? So obviously this man went from a loving, caring man, a decent human being, to now being a part of the man cult right in front of my eyes. I'm like, oh shit, who would have thought? He came to Texas and became a part of the good old boys, the man cult. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the beginning of the end. I got to find a job, I already knew that I was not going to be, a wife slave. As capable as I would be being a wife slave, I'm not going to be a wife slave. I could probably be the best wife slave, but I'm not going to be a wife slave. I wouldn't want that for my daughters. I wouldn't want that for any woman. right? So, yeah. And it definitely became the beginning of the end with that marriage. Because Nan, he was like, we were arguing over, religious matters. And I'm like, but, you'd never really, upheld, the Jehovah Witness, beliefs. What is going on here, And he was like, you're not going to take my child to, a Christian church, And I'm telling you, we literally had a tug of war with the baby. And I really was like, I have to release the child, because otherwise, she was probably going to end up with, a dislocated shoulder, or her arms literally being pulled off, And, he was like, this is my child, my child is not going to any Christian church. And I'm like, it's not your child. This is my child too. And yes, that was the beginning of the end. He ended up doing things like, trying to hit me with the car while I went in the garage. Other times, he would take off, before I even got out of the car. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's going to kill me. He's literally going to hurt me. We definitely need to get this divorce. So we get the divorce, and I find out that he thought because my name wasn't on the mortgage that I had no ownership to the house. And, and they had to explain to him that, yes, she has ownership. This is a community property state. You guys was, technically you were common law married, just for the mere fact that you guys was living together for 6 years. And, and even though you've been divorced, even though you've been, only married for 2 years, she still, would have, ownership in the home. And that's when it had dawned on me that this man had really wanted to put me out with the baby. No, he didn't want to put me out with the baby. He wanted full custody of the baby. But he wanted to put me out on the street. And like I said, I didn't even know who this man was. I didn't even know. It was like, dang, you treated me so well for 6 years before we got married. And it plummeted right after the marriage and the baby. So, yeah, I wanted to go ahead and record this because, a lot of people, don't understand that just because people don't talk about, the things that happen to them doesn't mean that they haven't had bad circumstances and situations. Okay? So thank you for watching Cherie's Weight Loss Journey, and bye.